Hello, friend. Welcome to the Happy Family Club. We're delighted to have you join us. Our mission is to help you have a happier, stronger family. We do that by bringing you the world's greatest experts in family, marriage, parenting, and relationships. We interview them to discover their secrets, their strategies, their techniques, and bring them to you so that you can cherry pick exactly what you need right now to have more success and more joy in your family.
And if you enjoy this interview, we encourage you to share it with your friends and your family and come on to the happyfamilyclub.com and see if you can find more information that's going to help you and your family be happier.
Again, thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the interview. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Happy Family Club podcast. We are so excited to have you here today. Margie and I feel like we have an amazing episode for you in our guest. He is, we've had a chance to visit with him a bit here as we started off and off camera. And what an incredible individual this is. So I'd love to introduce you or have Margie introduce you to Russ De Vos.
Russ De Vos, thank you for joining us today. We're so happy you're here.
Yeah.
I love that your mission basically is to help people having challenges, parents especially with troubled teens. And the teen challenge that you've been focusing on lately is just amazing. Just helps those parents adjust when their children come home from that, and so that they can improve their life. That's so great. But Russ is the proud husband of Heather and Sam, Lily, and Simon. Is that right?
You got it, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Former pastor, award-winning salesman. I think you got certified as a certified life coach with John Maxwell, right? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's in the past, he's helped a lot of men move forward, win at home and in the things that matter most. But now he's focused more on parents and families. So we're so happy that you're here and ready to share with us all your great wealth of wisdom.
Yeah.
We'll do our best. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about Russ that you guys should know is, sometimes we meet people and they seem like they had a charmed life from day one. And you think, oh, that's amazing. I could never be like that person. I mean, I'm glad to look at him. It's cool to see and, and aspire to that, but that's just not, I have such a shattered, broken past and I could never be like that. Well, without getting into too many details, I'll let Russ show whatever story he wants, but I know for a fact that Russ is human, which I love. And he has gone through some rocky things, and by the grace of God and through his own hard work and the love of his family and others, he has really transformed his life. And I actually, before we even started this interview, and I don't even know where it's going to go, but before I started this interview, I thought, you know what? I'm going to title this interview "The Rise of the Phoenix," because I just love your story, Russ. And the way that you have come and transformed your life is just absolutely beautiful. So thank you for being here. Thank you for changing your life and blessing so many other people's lives.
And it gives all of us hope.
I know, exactly.
There's hope for each one of us.
Because no, not to tell any secrets, but I'm sort of a broken, messed up guy too. So I really like that there's hope, right? It's fabulous. Margie's not. Margie is one of those charmed people. Yeah. Perfect for like Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. Anyway, Russ, thank you. Welcome. I would love to I'd love to dive in and hear your wisdom on what it takes to have really a happy family. But before that, can you tell us a little bit about your story and your background? I mean, how did you get, because your process, sales guy, pastor, struggles, and then life coach for men, and now focusing with teen parents, like that. What an amazing journey. So could you walk us through that to help us understand how you got to where you're at right now?
Yeah, the journey, right?
The journey. Yeah, let's hear it.
And if I get emotional, you'll have to forgive me, because telling my story, it really, even at this moment, I feel it. So give me a second. I was blessed to be raised with a wonderful mom and dad. I will say it was a very religious home, very strict, very protected. And, but so many blessings. And the older I get, the more I realize how blessed I was. But it was kind of a charmed life, to be honest with you. By God's grace, I thrived in most everything I did. I was a wrestler, and my senior year of high school, I won the state title in Oregon at 191 pounds. So I pretty much had my ticket punched to anywhere I wanted to go. You know, I had offers from Stanford, West Point, all sorts of places to wrestle. I didn't want to wrestle. So I took a year off. I ended up going to Liberty University, and then I wrestled the second year that I was there on scholarship. I was cutting so much weight, I just decided that was enough of that. 13 pounds a week I was cutting. So ended up going to Bible school. I was born in Canada, up in a little town called Three Hills, Alberta, Canada. So ended up going to a tiny little Bible college up there. It's a place my mom and dad both had graduated from. And I had sworn that I would never go into ministry. That was a non-negotiable. My dad was a pastor. I had watched multiple pastors fail morally. While my dad was an assistant, I had watched the men that he worked with fail in grotesque ways, to be honest with you. It was really, really, so I had sworn I will never be a pastor. I will never be in ministry. I wanted to be a politician, a U.S. senator from the state of Oregon.
Nice.
But I ended up, without getting into too many details, God clearly called me into ministry. So I spent 2 years on the mission field in traveling with a director of a mission organization. And then I spent a year in India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and then finally in Israel. And it was just phenomenal, but came home not knowing what I was going to do, thinking I would be on the mission field long term. Did not happen, but long story short, I ended up going into ministry, just as I said I never would. I had married my wife, Heather. I was almost 30 when I got married, so it was a lot of years of singleness, and then got married with a lot of dreams of what a family would look like and how our marriage, it didn't work that way. Our marriage was a nightmare right from the beginning. In fact, our wedding day was a nightmare. The rehearsal dinner was a nightmare. I mean, our honeymoon, I felt like I can't do this. A month in, we were ready to get divorced. I mean, it was awful.
Wow.
And in all the midst of that, I ended up going into ministry, which is so crazy. And I was a junior high pastor at a Foursquare church in Bend, Oregon, initially. And successful. We watched growth. Everything I did grew. But underneath all of the growth was character issues that I had my whole life, but I had suppressed them. I had hidden them. And success has a way of revealing you. It's a blessing, but it's also the weight of success is very, very heavy, and it will crack your foundation if it's not solid.
Yeah.
And pride is a killer, and I allowed pride to really grow in my heart as success continued. And in the first church I was in as a youth pastor, then I was moved up into the adult world and was being groomed to take over the church. It was a very large Foursquare church. Unbeknownst to many of the people there, I had started a relationship with a woman on staff there, and thankfully it did not become adulterous, but it was certainly inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I knew if I don't get out of here, it will be adulterous and it will be disastrous. So I left that church and thought I had dealt with everything, but the roots hadn't been yanked.
Yeah.
So about 8 months later, my wife and I planted our own church, and it grew from 17 people to almost 2,000 people in 3 years. It just exploded.
That's incredible.
It was an unbelievable experience, you guys. I can't even tell you. It was like living in the book of Acts. I mean, it was literally like New Testament. It was crazy. But in the midst of that, 3 years in, right almost to the day, because of unyanked roots and because of discontentment, entitlement, all sorts of pride-based character issues, I got involved with another woman. And again, it was, thank God he protected me. Again, it was not adulterous. In fact, it was nipped very quickly.
Yeah.
God uncovered it. He allowed me to be caught by, I mean, the story is, it's just hard even to tell it. It's 16 years ago now, but it's still hard to tell the story. But ministry was over.
Yeah.
And I preached one Sunday morning. I walked off the stage and I looked at the people from the side of the stage. I knew this will be the last time I ever see these people.
Wow.
And it was. And I performed communion and walked off the stage. People were singing and doing business with God. And that was the last time I ever saw them. The next day, my job was done. My marriage was almost over. I mean, it all broke.
Yeah.
And we ended up then moving from Bend to Seattle to start over, really, to start our whole life. And that was a nightmare also. The church we went to start over was worse than the one we had created, the mess we created. And for 2 years, I was an angry man.
Yeah.
Angry at God. I mean, I had my middle fingers up at God. It was awful. My Bible that I had spent hours every weekend was not my friend anymore. I didn't open my Bible. I was a mess. And here's the thing that is so extraordinary about that. I had taught about God's grace with authority and with conviction. But I came to find out I didn't really know what grace was.
Yeah.
Grace is God's unmerited, unearned favor. And I somehow thought that grace was what I earned because I was a good guy and a great pastor and all the rest. And I spent 2 years in sales. I'd never done anything else but ministry. So I went on to monster.com and looked at what jobs I could possibly get in Seattle, you know, and it was computer stuff, which I didn't even hardly know how to turn on a computer, much less sell computers. And the other was a home improvement company that they would send people into homes trying to sell windows.
Yeah.
And I got a job selling windows. And this is the irony of it all. For 2 years, I drove from appointment to appointment, screaming, yelling, cursing at God in my car.
Wow.
Bitter, angry, blaming my wife, blaming God, blaming the elders of the church, blaming my mom, blaming everybody. And the only thing that God did was make me number one in the company, break every sales record possible, made more money than I've ever seen in my life, allow us to travel all over the place as a family. I mean, it was, and when those 2 years were done and I really started to come out of that, I realized that's what grace is.
Yeah.
I deserved lightning through the roof of my car. I deserved death. And instead of that, he gave me blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing. And our family was so privileged in so many ways. And I just realized, okay, now I think I know what grace is.
Yeah.
And the goodness of God was so extraordinary during that time. But having said that,
Can I pause you there just a minute?
Yeah,
I want to ask something there. You know, Russ, it's a rare. It's not as rare as we think sometimes, but it's unusual for someone, as the scriptures say, to come to themselves, right?
yes.
And you know, you're describing this really incredible story, not a story, experience. And somewhere along the line, there had to have been some precipitating event that caused you to go, okay, wait a minute. And I know you're talking about grace and you realize these blessings, but I just wonder what gave you the fortitude and the courage to start stepping out of that hatred and that anger and that frustration, right? I'd love to, there's a piece there where you switched, and I'd love to hear about that real quick.
And you know, as you're asking that question, I'm not honestly sure, other than I think it was what I've realized over the last 16 years of work is, and the story is going to get a lot worse before it gets better, by the way, is that I lived my life in a fog of so much lack of self-awareness. I didn't know myself. I didn't know. Some of it was probably pride. Some of it was probably that we didn't communicate about emotions or anything of any depth in my home, growing up. So I surely don't hold that against my parents. It just wasn't the way it worked.
Sure.
We were performance driven.
Yeah.
We performed. All of us got good grades. We were some of the best athletes in the school. We were on the, Rotary Club Student of the Month, all the stuff. We had all the awards and the badges, but we didn't really talk about the heart. And so I think I didn't really know my heart. I didn't know my own weaknesses. And I think over that course of 2 years, it was really right around 2 years, the fog started to lift a little bit. And it wasn't by any means fully lifted. That's been a process that goes on to this day. But I think I started to first of all realize I can't keep blaming everybody else. I've been blaming everybody and so angry at God. And I think I just saw all of his kind. I think it was just an overwhelming sense of, why does he keep blessing me when I keep cursing him?
Yeah.
And I think there was just a point where I just realized, wow, because I did pick up my Bible again. I started pursuing a relationship with God again. And I know the relationship was there during those 2 years. It was just a very, very odd, strained wrestling with God that was just intense, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I think it was just a realization. I remember thinking, so that's what grace is.
Yeah.
And I think there was a gratitude that settled into my heart that displaced a lot of the ingratitude and discontentment and the blaming. And there was a process where my heart started turning again. And I think it was just, Romans 2 verse 4 says, it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly, I haven't actually ever put those two together until just now.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the answer to your question. I think it was the kindness of God that started to turn my heart when I realized he's been nothing but good and I've been nothing but awful.
Yeah.
And he just keeps being kind. And I just thought, oh my word. And I think that's probably what was happening.
That's amazing. So I just want to say, for the thousands of people's lives you've touched, thank you for responding to that kindness of God and turning, in a sense, to gratitude. I see two things at play here, Russ. I mean, God definitely was just pouring out stuff on top of you.
Yep.
And if the truth be told, at least in my experience, and I've been a bishop in my church and I've ministered with thousands of people, and I've coached over 30,000 entrepreneurs across the world. Like I've dealt with a lot of people, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And here's my experience. My experience is God is always pouring out his love onto his children, but they don't usually recognize it. And you had the courage after a couple of years to recognize it and start your prodigal journey back. Right?
Yeah.
And so kudos to you. I think that's awesome. And I think that if anyone's listening to this, like that sense of humility and gratitude and opening your eyes and just seeing, gosh, is God doing something for me? And what is it? I think it's so powerful. That kindness turns the heart, as you say. So thank you. Yeah. So you said the story gets worse before it gets better. So you piqued my interest, man. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So you want me to just pick up where we left off?
Let's go. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
The work in our hearts is not a fast, quick thing. I found it. We all want God to change us a lot quicker than he does. And we want to grow faster than we do. And for me, it has not been, it has been the roots of things are so deep that to pull those and to really clean out the heart is really quite a process. So one of the things that marked when I temptation, not honoring my marriage vows. As First Timothy chapter 2 says, being the husband of one wife, as a qualification for a leader or an elder in the church. I was not the husband of one wife. My mind was not committed, and my heart was not committed to one woman. I in some of the counseling that I went through afterwards, one of the ladies counselors said, "Russ, you live as if you don't have a wedding ring on."
Wow.
And I tell you, that just smote me when I heard that.
Yeah.
So this is one of the principles that I've learned over the course of this journey, is that some of us are very stiff-necked, and we have to learn by a lot of pain. It takes a sledgehammer between the eyeballs to get us to change.
Yeah.
And with the unfaithfulness to my wife issue and the husband of one wife, the fallout of my unfaithfulness was so dramatic and so painful, and the loss was so great, that by God's grace, for the last 16 years, there's been a brick wall around our marriage. I mean, that issue really never has surfaced again. There's always, you have to be on guard. And I'll tell people, I'll never say that I'll never be unfaithful again, because the moment I do, that's setting me up, and a prideful statement that just sets me up. But that issue, by God's grace, has been dealt with.
Yeah.
What I then experienced was intense amounts of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And though I was experiencing the kindness of God, I realized how I've come to realize, and I began to work through the issue, the second major issue that derailed me even as a pastor, and that was unchecked anger.
Wow. Yeah.
And I thought it was righteous anger, how it was so easy to justify it.
Righteous indignation.
We all want to see ourselves as Christ with the whip in the temple square, right?
That's exactly right.
It's like, oh, this is great. I'm justified in it. Like, oh, dang it. Nope.
But that has been the journey. That has been the major journey. And so to long story short, though after 2 years I began to build my relationship with God again, it was another 6 years of just really stumbling around in the dark, deep depression, almost despair. What we had left in Bend was so beautiful, and the shipwreck was just so awful. I remember not really knowing anything about PTSD, but my wife was talking about it, and I looked up the definition of PTSD, and every trait there was me.
It was you. Yeah.
And this failure, because I had, up to 39 years old when all this blew up, really had the keys to the city. I mean, God had given me so much favor and so much trust with people. I could do almost anything I wanted. It was extraordinary. And that literally went away in a moment.
Yeah.
Our choices are huge. Our choices are huge. What we work all of our lifetime to gain, we can lose in a moment when our character isn't right. John Maxwell said it. He said, charisma will get you in the door, but character will keep you in the room.
Yeah.
There you go.
And that is one of the key statements of my whole life. There's so many people with charisma, lots of energy.
Mm-hmm.
They can draw you to them by their personality, but when you spend time with them, you realize they got a lot of charisma, not so much character.
Yeah.
And so the Lord began to say, began to prompt me that I'm gonna refine your character. You cannot be an angry man. You cannot be angry. I will not use you if you are an angry man. And I damaged all three of my relationships with my kids so desperately and so badly. My wife, I'll just say this, in 2015, it had been 8 years of just mucking around in darkness.
Yeah.
A statement by a salesman friend of mine that he used to close deals. And I thought it was so corny, but it hammered me. It was simply this: nothing changes unless something changes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
simple, but
So simple.
it was the catalyst in my life. I remember in November of 2015, sitting on our porch swing thinking something has to change. Our marriage was on the ragged edge. I didn't have almost any relationship with my children. They didn't want to be around me. And it was interesting because 2 days after that moment, I got angry at my daughter for disrespecting my wife, and I grabbed her by the neck and pushed her up against the wall. My daughter, she was a junior in high school, and that was over the line with my anger.
Yeah.
And my wife asked me to leave, and that started the first of 4 marital separations that we've experienced for over 2 years worth of time separated.
Yeah.
Not only 4 marital separations, but 2 times in jail. I've been in jail twice because of anger.
Yeah.
And I could justify each one and say why it wasn't really my fault and all the rest. But the second time I was in jail in the county detention center, it's so funny. I've got 3 guys on cots, or we had 2 bunk beds, and the other 3 guys are all sleeping off heavy drugs and petty crime and whatever. And I'm sitting in there and I'm wide awake, 2 a.m, and I'm pacing in the cell and doing business with God. And I heard his voice. He said, "Russ, I want to use you, but I won't use you while you're angry."
Wow.
And it was a turning point for me, and another turning point. I mean, there's so many different moments and I realized I can't keep justifying my anger as righteous. It wasn't righteous. It was damaging. It was abusive. It was very deeply controlling. It was ugly. And so the journey to get control over my anger was already in process, but it was accelerated immensely by jail time. And anyway, so that was the second major fire, if you will, that God used to burn off the dross and the impurities in my life. Meanwhile, all the while that we were in this separation, right towards the end of these different separations, our youngest son, who we had struggled with since he was 2.
Yeah.
We saw different things in him since he was a tiny child, but he was a savant violin player.
Wow.
Spectacular violin player.
Wow.
But very difficult getting along with anybody.
Yeah.
And in his own brokenness, he began to use drugs, which was a nightmare for me. I never dreamed I'd be a father of a child who used drugs. It just was one of the deep fears that I had.
Yeah.
And his junior year, we had tried everything. I had made every kind of chart you can imagine. We had tried every reward and consequence system you can imagine, everything.
Yeah.
And we were at our wits' end. Our marriage was, again, on a ragged edge. We could hardly agree on how to parent him. And it was at that point that we sent him, finally, after 2 years of wrestling with it, to Teen Challenge in Morrow, Arkansas, outside of Fayetteville.
Yeah.
And that started a whole nother journey. And I mean, the details there, I can bullet point them for you if you'd like. But what happened at that point was, again, God's grace. A class started for parents. It was the first of its kind. It was led by folks from a church in Dallas, Texas, who, believe it or not, the founders of this course called Prodigal were both plastic surgeons, very successful, world-renowned, who both had sons who were prodigal. Sons.
Yeah.
And so one of them, and together really, but led by one, had put together a curriculum, 20 weeks, on that took parents who were in that same chaos right through a 20-week course.
Of course.
And Teen Challenge had gotten a hold of these guys and asked, would you do something like this for a couple. We got a drug test. When he came home, we asked him to take the drug test. He wouldn't take it for almost 2 hours. But we sat on the couch in silence, said, nobody's going to bed, nobody's doing anything until this drug test. It came back positive for 3 different things. And at 10:30 at night, in a downpouring rain, he packed his bags and left the house.
Wow.
And that started, we didn't realize it, but that started 2+ years of addiction to fentanyl.
Wow.
And we are now, he graduated a week ago Sunday from his rehab. He's now about 9 months sober. He's 22 now.
Yeah.
And he is pursuing a life of sobriety, quietly building a relationship with Jesus. And we're still in the battle. This is not over.
Oh yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at now. My wife and I are doing better than we've ever done. But the process of walking with this through our son, walking through this with our son, after the first season of that 20-week course, the next season we became co-leaders.
Yeah.
The third season we became leaders.
Yeah.
And then we just finished season number 10.
Amazing.
Wow.
I know. And it's
God is using you now.
oh my goodness, 4+ years, and worked with hundreds and hundreds of parents. And so here's how my coaching fits into it. I was only coaching men, and so a lot of the men in these classes became my clients outside of Prodigal.
Outside of it, yeah.
But it has become very clear that the need for coaches for parents who are walking through this is so great that I've shifted to coaching families now, husbands and wives, through a 16-week coaching program that I've created called Lifeline.
Lifeline.
And it walks people right straight through week 1. Where does your hope have to be anchored? To week 16, there's a new sheriff in town taking back leadership of your home, and everything in between. And so, you guys, that's kind of bringing us right to this moment.
I knew the title of this was The Phoenix Rising. I mean, this is like, it's incredible on multiple different accounts. You know what? You shared with us some really personal and very private and very powerful things. And I am just overwhelmed by your generosity and transparency. And I think that it's a really, it's an amazing thing when you get that humble, God will bless you. And I hope that anyone listening to this that's holding on to that anger or that pride or that fear of being exposed, I hope that they see in you, Russ, that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be open. And in fact, that gratitude, that vulnerability, that openness is the path back, because it allows you to start from the beginning and to get the help you need and to get the support you need. So I want to talk. So first of all, thank you very much. That was
incredible journey.
It was an absolutely incredible journey, and I love that you're still on it. And I want to say one other thing that I think is amazing, and that is I'm astonished at the resilience of you and your wife and your son. I don't know the story of your other two, but certainly those three that you've highlighted there, your resilience to not give up. I have loved ones who have ended their life with drug overdose. I've seen people check out emotionally and mentally and just literally disappear, to this day, not to be heard of again. And you guys stuck. It's incredible.
Well, and I love how you have set the personal example for your son of this journey. And so now he has a tangible example to follow of how to overcome those negative character traits, how to create a relationship with God so he can move forward in his life.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah.
Please.
You guys, there is a reason. Nothing is an accident in our lives. That's one thing that I've really come to find out. When we were married, the day we were married, we stood in front of 250 people during the reception. And off the cuff, after we'd already said our vows, we'd already done that in the wedding ceremony. I turned to all the people and I put my arm around my wife. I looked at her and then I looked out at the people and I said, I promise all of you before God, and I'd already said my vows, but I said to them, I will never divorce this woman.
Wow.
I have no idea why. Well, I do now. I will tell you, my vows at that point I didn't understand the power of the vows and the sacredness of the vows. But for me, that statement in that reception hall, that was my vow.
Yeah.
And it has haunted me all these years. And I just realized I made a promise to all those people. Not even, I made a covenant before God. That wasn't as powerful. It hasn't been as powerful, frankly. It is now, but it hasn't been all these years as powerful as that statement that I made in front of the people.
Yeah.
And I just said, I can't go back on that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to keep that promise. There was a second thing, a book that I read. It was by a Christian counselor. He was an old statesman, been around for years. I can't even remember his name now, but I remember reading in a book, and this is the power of a statement to stick in your mind as a marker. He said, well, after all the years of coaching and of counseling couples, I've come to see that many of them give up right before the breakthrough.
Wow.
And he made the statement. I never had realized that physically this is actually true. It's always the darkest right before the dawn. That is physically the case. I didn't realize it until reading that statement. It literally is the darkest right before the dawn.
Yeah.
They're literally two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, I just thought, I will not be another one of those couples.
Nice.
Where we go through all this garbage, all this fighting, all of this struggle, all of this test, all of it, and then we just chuck it right before the dawn.
Yeah,
right.
And I just said, I won't be one of those. And my wife is just stubborn also. And I think it's a sacred stubbornness.
Sacred stubborn, yes.
And so we just have determined, and the third thing was we have had so many people tell us, we're watching your marriage.
Yeah.
And the fact that you are still together has given us the courage to stick it out ourselves.
Yeah.
And you guys, when you hear those kind of things, you just, it has been super glue for us.
Nice.
I mean, we're just realizing our marriage is so much bigger than us. It's not just about our happiness. It is a testimony and a testament to God's power, God's amazing grace in a life. And it's broadcasted way beyond just my wife and I, even way beyond our children, which I think have been so blessed to watch us walk through this.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the battle scars.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But it hasn't been because we're so amazing. There have been things that God has specifically and divinely placed in our lives that are kind of the guardrails, if you will, to keep us from going over the cliff. I have thought about leaving hundreds of times.
Yeah.
In my weak moments, I just say, I can't take this anymore. I just can't stand this anymore. This is too much, and then you start, well, I deserve this and I deserve that and I deserve better this and deserve. That word you got to get rid of that word. Yeah. And so I just wanted to comment on that because I just, again, see the grace of God in placing these moments in our lives that have truly been like guardrails for us so that we don't go over the cliff.
So can you talk a little bit about some of those either guardrails or principles? Because, you've got a great marriage now, and your son is pulling through, and you're still in the fight with him, and letting God do his business there.
Yep.
And so you're in the thick of these things. I wonder if you have some principles, and then we're going to talk about some actions, but some overarching principles, one or two, that you see are really impactful for you to keep you to get you where you're at now, and then to hold you there. So what would you say to couples that are struggling, and parents of teens or children of any age really that are struggling with this stuff? How do you get to where you're at now?
I'm gonna take that in two sections.
Beautiful.
Couples who are struggling.
Yeah.
There was a point in our marriage where I realized I'm not responsible for my wife. I was, the word codependency is one that is, kind of tossed around in counseling circles, but codependency essentially means that I'm dependent on somebody else's view of me for my own value.
Yeah.
And that I'm dependent upon their treatment of me, their view of me, for me to feel valuable. I was so codependent on my wife for so long. I needed her to affirm me, to think I was the greatest thing in the world, all of that. And it was such a crippling thing for me. Encouragement is phenomenal. Support is wonderful. All these things are very healthy, but if it becomes your source of value, people change. People are fickle. People are human. I've got to get my value from a higher source. And there was a point where I finally realized, and I think honestly, the separations were what began to do it for me. Because when I was separated from my wife, it was extraordinarily painful. On Christmas Day, I think it was the second separation, my wife was at home with our kids, and I was in my apartment. And I received an email with about 40 some odd bullet points of all the things my kids didn't like about me.
Oh my goodness.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
And I read that, and I'm telling you, it was like a dagger to the heart. It was awful. I still have it to this day, because I see it as I was able to somehow, by, again, God's help, see it as a bullet pointed list of the areas I needed to go to work.
Yeah.
And so I kept it as kind of my to-do list. And so here's my point. If you ask a couple, how many people have to change a marriage? Many people will say what?
Both of them. Both.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when they say that, I try to gently but respectfully, but strongly say no.
Yeah.
One person.
One.
It does not take both people to change a marriage. It takes one person. If one person changes 1%, that whole marriage changes by 1%.
Yeah.
And so I came to understand that principle and realize I can't change my wife, but I can change me. And the more I try to control my wife, change my wife, have all these expectations for my wife, it just ends in incredible frustration, and it creates all sorts of conflict. And one of the things we teach in the Lifeline course is that expectations are often just a setup for frustration, and they're also a catalyst for a lot of anger. A lot of anger flows out of unmet expectations that we need to just drop those expectations in large part. That's a whole nother conversation. But so that was very important for me to just, it was kind of, I got sequestered away with God and just said, let's work together, you and I. And part of that, the separations really caused me to pull into my relationship with God, and really, I think I began to know God in a way I never had before, because I was absent from those who I was so dependent on for my value. Well, they were in another house, and I couldn't even see them. And so I just began to work on myself. And I'll tell you, that's life-changing. When a dad, especially, and a man and a father has so much influence in a home. Not that the mother doesn't, she sure does, but the presence of a dad, or the absence of a dad, his lack of presence, has a huge place.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so I just realized I can't control my kids, I can't control my wife, but I can control my journey to growth. And so I just began, I hired a coach. You guys, this is one of the reasons why I'm such a big believer in coaches. My first coach that I hired, I looked across the horizon of my life. This is November of 2015, and literally every area of my life was a mess, except for making a lot of money. And this is the story of a lot of men. They can make money hand over fist, but they can't do anything else. They're out of shape physically. Their marriage is a mess. Their kids are a mess. And that was me to the detail. Yeah. And then I said, which area do I need to start working on first? Because you can really only start one place and focus there and then move. Right. And I realized I was heavily overweight, traveling in these sales, McDonald's, traveling from, a traveling sales guy, McDonald's, Wendy's, all the junk food. And I was just a mess. So I hired a coach to help me lose weight, and I lost 33 pounds in 7 weeks.
That's awesome.
Nice.
And it was so dramatic, and the change was so instant almost. I mean, I stopped snoring. I was sleeping. My whole life changed. Because I realized I can't tackle all these other areas because I can't even sleep well because I'm just so overweight. Yeah. And when you're lacking sleep, it affects every other area of your life. So that I saw the dramatic changes that a coach made, and I paid a good chunk. I paid almost $2,500 for that 7 weeks. Yeah, but it was the best money I've probably ever spent. But it showed me, oh my word, what people can do when they have somebody who believes in them, who supports them, holds them accountable, trains, and is a contact point. And then I hired another coach to start helping me with my anger. And he was just a little guy named Elijah, and he was a former Marine and just a good guy. And he and I started working through anger issues. Yeah. And there was major breakthrough that started to happen there as I began to rewire and renew my mind. Romans 12 verse 2 says that you're transformed by the renewal of your mind. It's not by the adjustment of your behavior. It's by the renewal of your mind. All of our behaviors flow out of our beliefs and our thoughts. So when you get the mind right, the behaviors take care of themselves. And so I started getting my mind right. And that I realized my mind was just a big garbage dump for every kind of ugly, hateful, dark thing about my children, my wife. I had such awful thoughts. And I wasn't even aware of some of them until I did what is called a brain dump. And I dumped out about 32 different thoughts that I had about my children.
Wow.
And it was the ugliest list you've ever seen. It was uncensored. I was nobody else around. I was in a coffee shop by myself after a coaching session with Elijah. He had asked me the question, because I was telling him how frustrated I was with my kids and how they were such, blah, 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 and out of control and disrespectful and blah, blah. And he said, if you saw your kids as your employees, would that change the way you treat them? And I sat for a moment and I thought, it sure would.
Yeah, right.
I would treat them very different if they were my employees. And then that stimulated a whole line of thought that I went away from that coaching session and I said, how do I think of my children?
How do you see them? Yeah.
And so I took a notebook, and on the left-hand side of the page, I wrote down uncensored. I just opened up my cranium and dumped every thought I could think of. And it was 32. And I stood back and I looked at that list after I'd finished. I couldn't think of anything else. And I thought, no wonder my kids can't stand me.
Right. Yeah. Because we all know children feel that from you. Whatever your thoughts are, they feel it, they sense it. It shows up in all your communications and your tone of voice and your body language. It does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you had 32, wow.
And what I realized was, now I understand why I'm so angry.
Yeah.
Because it's these thoughts that is driving my emotion of anger. It's driving behavior. So what I did then was I did what is called a turnaround. On the right-hand side of the page, I went sentence for sentence. And I wrote the truth as looking through God's eyes at my children.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys, here's the powerful thing about this exercise. I call it the brain dump. I stood back and I had 2 lists sitting in front of me at that point. And I was at a crossroads. I had to make a choice. I got to make a choice. And I realized for the first time, I can live off the left list, which I have been for much of my adult life with my kids, or I can shift and I can begin to live off the right side of that page.
Yeah.
The right side. And I made a very distinct choice. I will not ever go back to the left side of the page again.
Yeah.
That is history. And so I took the right side of the page, all those thoughts that were so beautiful, so healthy, so wonderful, and I began to review them day after day after day after day. And literally, as scripture says, transformation comes by the renewing of your mind.
Renewing the mind.
Much of my anger towards my kids just went away.
It's weird.
Yeah.
All those 32 beautiful thoughts about who my kids were from God's standpoint of view, it just replaced anger with gratitude and with empathy and with compassion and with excitement. You know, there's just so many other emotions that came when I'm thinking these beautiful thoughts.
Yeah. It's incredible.
That was a huge turning point.
What a great exercise. I love that. I think everybody should do that.
Oh, yeah. In lots of different categories of our life.
Like your marriage, your children, any relationships.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
So I had a question for you, but I think you answered it. So I'm going to ask the question and highlight how you already answered it. You're a prophet, John. You're ahead of me, man. So the question is like, so these expectations that we often have for people, you could also say its expectation is this belief level of this view of how we see them. And I think that we become addicted to that, right? It's almost like this addiction because it serves our selfish ends, our pride, right? There's so many things that it feeds them. So we're using it to defend ourselves or protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that if you look at that list, it's like, well, you know, some of these things you think about your children may have been, I'm guessing, but may have been a way to protect you or to glorify you. I'm actually a good guy because they're terrible and do this, right? And we become addicted to these kind of thoughts. And so the question I was going to ask is, how do we replace those expectations? Because we all know habits are not removed, they're replaced.
Yeah.
And because we're creatures of habit, and so your body and your system all wants to move toward these repetitive things, especially if you're slightly OCD like me, right, babe? At any rate.
Russ isn't. OCD.
No, and I see that. So at any rate,
borderline all the time.
Borderline.
Yeah.
But what I love about what you said is that you're replacing those expectations with being able to see others through God's eyes. That's really what I got out of what you just said. And when we put on that lens, it transforms everything. And then it allows us to start renewing our mind. And then, as you said, that renewal changes into new feelings, and those new feelings change into new behavior.
Yes.
You know, and that's that pattern process. I think people get so like fearful and frustrated, like, how do I change? And I don't know where to start and what I do. And what you're saying is like, oh, look, this is actually easy. Put on a new lens. It generates new emotions. We have new behavior sets. And it's such a powerful pattern. Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly right. And I think most people are not aware. First of all, this whole issue of self-awareness, John Maxwell talks about it in his book, 21 Irrefutable Laws. No, it's 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth is the book that comes out. It's the law of awareness. And it says, the law of awareness simply states, you must know yourself to grow yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think so much of the hard work, our lives are so busy, they're so fast paced that we don't take the time, we don't make the time or take the time to do the hard work that is most of our most profound growth is done in solitude. It's done behind closed doors where other people don't see it. It's the hard work is the heart work. And that usually happens in solitude. And so to speak to the issue of expectations, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of them, I just finished a training called Letting Go. It's probably the pivot training of all of the training to parents with their troubled teens. We have so many dreams for our kids and so many visions of who they should be, what they should attain, all the rest. For me, that drove control, that drove the anger, that drove so many negative things for me, that I just have come to realize there's a principle that we teach in parenting, the difference between responsible to and responsible for.
Yeah.
This was absolutely life-changing for me when I realized this, because when they're younger, we are responsible for them, right? I mean, they're just figuring things out. We when they're splashing around in the toilet, because they think it's so much fun, we've got to intervene in those situations.
Right.
And
just if there's brown stuff in there,
That's
gotta
it.
intervene.
Yeah.
So important.
And so, but as they get older, we begin to give them more space, and we begin to give them more opportunity to make decisions and to make mistakes and to fail.
Yeah.
Because failure is one of our greatest teachers.
Yeah.
And this principle was so revolutionary to me, because I took responsible for right into the very latter part of their high school years versus responsible to. Responsible to, during the responsible for years, I'll just say this quickly, is we teach them. Words are very important during those years.
Yeah.
That's where, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says you're to speak of them when you rise up. You're to speak of God's commands when you lay down, when you go out, when you come in, it's just a lifestyle of teaching the principles and the commandments of God.
Mm-hmm.
As they get older, if you've done your job in the younger years, and unfortunately, you can't really say, well, I didn't do my job in the younger years, now I'm going to lecture you all your teenage years. It doesn't work that way. You've got to begin to step back. It's not so much words as it is modeling.
Modeling. Mm-hmm.
And so many parents are not integrous between what they say and what they do. There's not integrity.
Yeah.
And kids have an antenna. And so we model, and we give them room to make decisions. It's a process, of course, but then we allow the consequences of their decisions. Yeah. And we're responsible to them to be consistent, to be a model, to be that picture of the things we've taught them all those years. Now, this is what it looks like, and we're going to let you make some choices as to whether you want to apply that or not. But you're also going to get the consequences when you choose both good and bad, right? The consequences can be wonderfully good. Mm-hmm. And so how does that translate into expectations? I felt so responsible for my kids' spiritual lives, for my kids' educational life, for my kids' athletic life, for my kids' musical life, and it's like when you're taking responsible for into those years when they're becoming an adult, it becomes almost inevitably controlling behaviors.
Of course.
That control just creates all sorts of conflict.
Yeah. Especially since it's an absolute guarantee. Anybody who's had parent, if you've been a parent, it's an absolute guarantee they're not going to follow the quote unquote plan.
You got it.
Like, and if you're responsible and they keep veering off the path, then like you said, that's where the control comes in. Is like, hey, you're off the path. Like, I'm going to force you to get back on here. Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? One thing we know is God does not force us. It's like when you were in jail, God could have forced you to give up the anger, but he didn't. He said, look, I want to use you, but I won't use you angry. So you got to decide. And he steps back and goes,
that's exactly right.
Your choice, buddy.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So I think that's it's really, really powerful what you're saying. And, when the child is 2 years old and starts running out of the road, bodily extract them from the road. I mean, come on, right? When they're 15 and running down a path, it's like, well, they're kind of in jail, pacing around angry, and you got to go, well,
what are you gonna do?
you can't live life angry and have these rewards, so you got to make a choice, and you got to love them. So I love what you're saying here.
I'll add one thought to it, and that is this. When I released those expectations of all of our kids, guys, it's been all of them.
Of course. Yeah.
It gave them then the freedom to love them right where they're at. And what I had to realize was the path that you're talking about, we have this picture of what it looks like.
Yeah.
That's That's so not the path most of the time. I mean, there are principles, but we're and that's where our life gets so uptight and so controlling, is you're veering off the path. My son, my 22-year-old who just, you know, is coming out of rehab and learning how to walk in a healthy way, his path is so radically different than anything I ever would have dreamed.
Totally.
And I have to believe his mess, his test, is literally setting him up to have a testimony and a message that is so powerful, that's going to speak to so many people. Would I have chosen that route? Never in a million years.
Never. Yeah.
But it's not up to me. And this is one thing that we share with parents over and over and over. And it's like, boom, their eyes, those are not your kids.
Yeah, that's right.
You are a steward of them. God has divinely given you stewardship over those children. They're his. They belong to him. And by the way, he loves them infinitely more than you do.
Yeah.
He knows every detail of their heart, every fabric. Psalm 139, he knit them together in their mother's womb. He's written a book, a story, their own biography. He knows everything about them. You can't parent that child better than he can.
Nope.
That's right.
Amen.
And
well,
so,
you know, Russ, we have 11 children. I don't know if you knew that.
That's fantastic.
But it's amazing to see each one of them. You know, we raised them all. We thought we raised them all the same.
Yeah.
But each one is choosing their own separate path.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And, you know, if we can see the beauty in it instead of holding on to, oh, you didn't turn out the way I wanted you to be.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And you know, that turnaround conversation you're talking about, I think it's awesome when parents can say, like we've tried to say, it's like, well, you didn't turn out the way I expected or wanted you to be. You're turning out the way God intends you to be, and thank heavens I was wrong.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And
Exactly.
even all the struggles and trials that your son's going through, I think, you know what, you're right. God looks at that, and his redeeming grace and his plan for people is just amazing. He knows the plan, and he's willing to work with us on it. And we as parents get to be the cheerleaders, the support, and the guides, but we don't get to be the control. But you know, it's amazing.
Yep.
Wow.
So Russ, I think that we should talk again, because I got more stuff.
More questions.
And
our time is running short.
Yeah, and you have amazing amount of wisdom. I wonder if there's any, you know, as we kind of wrap up, actually I want to cover two things. One is I would love to hear if there's something that has been on your heart and mind that you wanted to share with us that you haven't, we haven't got to yet. And I'd love to hear that really quick. And then also I would love to hear how we can point people into your world, right? Because you've got this Lifeline course, you've got the resources, you've obviously got a lot of wisdom, you've got experience in spades, brother.
Yes.
Wow. And and I think that there's a lot of people that could benefit from that. So first of all, is there any question I should have asked you, or that you wanted to talk about that we hadn't got to, or any last thoughts you'd like to share with us?
This has been really wonderful, guys. Really wonderful dialogue. And if we want to get down in the nitty gritty and the weeds, there's so many principles and things that we can talk about. And that would be a great second conversation. The thing that I'll just say this, the first lesson of the 16 weeks is called Hope's Anchor.
Hope's Anchor.
Where must our hope be anchored?
Yeah.
And one thing that I have to immediately get centered and it's a ground level truth with the parents that we work with. And this is with anybody, everybody, all of us. And that is, if our hope if you don't have hope, you're in trouble, right? Our hope is going to be anchored somewhere. It's going to be attached or tethered to something or someone.
Yeah.
And what I share with the parents is this, and it's just straight out of the chutes. If your hope is tethered to an outcome or to a resource that is not God himself, your hope is in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Right.
God is the only rock.
Yeah.
He's the only immovable, unchangeable, stable, reliable source for our hope. And when everything is dark, when everything looks impossible, when you're tethered, your hope is linked, anchored, chained, super glued to God himself, you can make it through virtually anything.
Yeah.
And that has been such a huge, I mean, it's really relationship with God 101. I mean, it's really the entry, but it's also the exit, and it's everything in between.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I think our whole journey on this life is really a process of learning to trust God.
Yeah.
And it sounds so simple, and it sounds almost like, is that all you got? Yeah, I'll tell you, when you start to get that, everything changes.
Everything changes.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's the final little nugget there. There
you go.
Amen.
God is building that into my life.
And so we would echo that. I mean, anytime in my life when I have put my hope that someone else will change, or that an outcome will happen that I want them to do, or whatever it is, I've been sorely and sometimes bitterly disappointed.
Right.
But conversely, when we have put our hope in God and our trust in him, we've never been disappointed. And we've not always liked the outcome. I want to state that right now. Because, I love the quote, and we've kind of inferred to it, but that quote from C.S. Lewis, where it's like, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, God comes to us and says he's going to help fix up our cottage. And so at first he starts, fixing the plumbing and changing a few walls here and there. And we thought, oh, that needed to be fixed anyway. That's nice. Thank you, God. That's great. And then all of a sudden he brings in a wrecking ball. And it's like, dang, that hurts. It's like, well, he's not fixing to make you a cottage. He's fixing to make you a mansion, a huge castle. And
I love that. I've never heard that. That's a great.
I'll send you the actual quote.
I'll send
you the actual quote. It's beautiful. And it's really the way it is. And so I love your point about letting go, because when we let go, we're simultaneously letting go and we're anchoring ourselves to hope, but we're anchoring it to a place that actually can do something. I had an atheist. I'll talk too much, but I have a friend who's an atheist, good, decent guy, and I'm good friends with him. And he just can't wrap his head around the concept of God, which I think requires way more faith than believing in God. But that's a whole separate topic. So I'm not going to go there. But I once said to him, I said, look, I got an IT guy that lives up in Canada. I've never met him. I've seen a picture of him. I've never touched him. And yet he does stuff for me that I can't do for myself. Right. And I just said, to me, that is an analogy of God. Right. He's never physically walked in the door and sat down and chilled with us. But I know he's there, and I've seen the work that he does in my life, and it never fails. Ever. And I think that's it's an important lesson for parents to learn, because we think we have to control it. I've had lots of coaches in my life as well. One of my coaches once said, I think I just totally ruined this. And they said, let me just tell you, you're not powerful enough to destroy God's plan for you. Sorry.
That's some good wisdom right there.
He actually is. He's actually stronger than you are. Sorry.
That's good.
So Russ, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. I can't thank you enough. Margie and I just felt such a strong spirit about where you're at, what you're doing, the good you're doing. So tell us a little bit more about your program, the life Lifeline. Thank you. Yeah. And how do we
access it?
We'll share a link.
I'll give you a link.
You can give us a link later on, but
gateway into it. Yeah.
Tell people a little bit about it real quick.
Lifeline is for parents who just they're navigating this journey, trying to, with kids who are wreaking havoc in their home.
Yeah.
And it's chaotic. They don't know what to do. I mean, teens are intensely strong-willed. It's just incredible how frustrating they can be. And there's usually a lot of anger, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of despair, a lot of lack of sleep, missing of work. I mean, it's a mess.
Everything
we're dealing with, and it's almost It's same right across the board. And so when I start working with them, that's where they're at. They come in just, what do we do?
Yeah.
And we walk them through 16 weeks where they walk from just complete, big eyes, like I don't have a clue, to the words that I use are calm and confident and with a plan.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because that is not an overstatement. There's a calm, there's a confidence because there's a direction. And if folks are married, because we work with a lot of single parents also, but if they're married, they're united, at least working towards that. I mean, it's not a magical formula, 16 weeks and everything's fixed, but there's movement towards, I have a direction. I have the ability now to bring peace back to the home.
Yeah.
And to provide an environment that is healthy and whole where people can heal if they choose to be there.
Yeah.
Which is a big, part of that is boundaries and consequences. Sometimes the choice is, I don't want to live under this.
That's right.
So that 16 weeks is Lifeline course. I choose to do it as a group experience, not as an individual experience. Primarily, there is that option. It's more expensive because it's the group. There is something about walking through this intense valley. Most parents are dealing with drug addicted kids or substance abuse or whatever. They're embarrassed.
Yeah.
They don't want to tell anybody about it. They're living in isolation, secrecy. And when you bring this into a community and you see other people are battling through it as well, there is an intense healing that goes on and the support. So I love to go through these principles and walk families through it together with a minimum. I try to have at least a minimum of 3 families. It is miraculous what happens. Just the ministry that they give to one another and the support and all that happens there. So it's a group coaching experience, walking from essentially overwhelm and hopelessness to calm and confident with a plan. And it is our own experience. That's how we live. We're where the parents typically are, and we've walked through and we are calm and confident and united, and we have a distinct plan on paper that we follow to the detail, and it has brought peace and stability and joy back to our home.
I love it. So cool. Well,
great that you facilitate that for people, that growth. It's amazing, Russ.
And we strongly, if you're in a situation in life, for all of our listeners now, if you're in a situation where you're wrestling with that, and it doesn't have to be about drug addiction. It's all about the chaos and the conflict and the butting heads. And it's about you as a parent feeling like you've got to control this path and finding the skills and the tools to let go so that you can facilitate and enable positive growth for your children so they become who they are meant to be.
Yeah.
And so if you're in that situation, I strongly encourage you to check out Russ's program. It sounds absolutely incredible. Margie and I are going to find way more about it, but it's just had so many positive benefits for you and Heather and for these other families you worked with. So again, Russ, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, I'll give you the link to that, you guys.
Yeah, yes, please. Share that with us.
It's very simple. It's simply discovery, the word discovery, Catalyst Coaching, HQ, as in headquarters, Catalyst, discovery.catalystcoachinghq.com. And that's easy. Take you right to an overview of my whole course.
Okay.
It's an overview of all 16 weeks, the 3 phases, 3 stages of the course, and then give an opportunity for a parent to schedule a discovery call. There's no charge for that, just to talk, find out where you're at, where you want to go, and what we need to get there.
Perfect. That's awesome. What a great resource. Even that initial conversation, I'm sure will be hugely valuable to people. So awesome.
All right.
Thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. And God bless you in your ministry and your work and all that you're doing for families. We just, we're cheering you on with all of our heart and soul, buddy. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank
All
you. Maybe we'll bounce into each other in Arkansas, and look forward to the next conversation, by the way.
Absolutely.
That's
We'll book a
right.
follow-up. This has been good. There's
Let's
more to
do
talk
it.
about. So
Very good.
thank you. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks,
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.